Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Sustainable Energy Week in 2020, to the session where we will discuss beyond the crisis beyond the crisis, clean energy for green recovery and growth, being the main topic of the Clean Energy Sustainable Energy Week this year. And today we will discuss the decisive action on energy poverty, how we can address energy poverty in this area. My name is Katarina Siikov, and I am from the European Commission, DG Energy, where I head the Directorate on Internal Energy Market. I am very pleased to be here today with you to discuss the very important topic of energy poverty. First of all, I would like to thank Harriet and Stefan from the EU Energy Poverty Observatory, who have worked with us and who are co-hosting this session today. So already thanks to your great work in terms of looking into the energy poverty and exploring and analyzing the issues related to energy poverty. The Energy Poverty Observatory started its work in the end of 2016, and the challenge of energy poverty was at the time not so topical as it has become today. Of course, many member states addressed and took measures to address be it energy poverty or poverty in general, but there was no common approach in Europe. There was no discussion at the European level. And against this background, from a suggestion from the European Parliament, the observatory was established. And now it has become a prominent center point to energy poverty data, energy poverty analysis and assessment. We have today a very prominent set of speakers. I'm very pleased to see so many of you with a very varied background, despite these challenges of going digital instead of having a real face-to-face meetings. So we are very lucky to have 3 member states present here their experience and approaches from Ireland, Greece and Czechia. And in addition to that, very prominent representatives from organizations like Climate Alliance to Save Energy, Next Energy Consumer, and the Institute for European Energy and Climate Policy. The moderator will introduce all the speakers individually, but I can already, from my side now, thank for this participation and look forward to a fruitful discussion. 2020 will be an important milestone when looking at energy poverty. We all agree that ensuring fairness in the transition towards a climate neutral union by 2050 is the key objective of the European Green Deal that was proposed and put on the table in December 2019. The Green Deal explicitly refers to addressing energy poverty and on the fairness of the energy transition. The energy transition is, as always, is both a challenge and opportunity for European households. As emerges from the Commission's long-term strategic vision up to 2030, energy-related expenses per household are important, and we need to ensure that when transiting to decarbonized economy, that these costs are managed and energy remains affordable for our citizens and households. At the same time, the Commission also presented a communication on a strong social Europe for just transition, and it was presented at the same time as the just transition mechanism that aims at leveraging up to 110 million Europeans from energy poverty. So we still have several 110 million people who are at the risk of poverty or social exclusion. And what we can already say is that the trend is going down. We have 7 million less than the previous year, but we are still far from the social Europe and the fair transition that we need to see. The COVID-19 virus, of course, has made the challenge bigger. People have been laid off from their jobs and have not been able to earn their salary in many places. Against the background of the COVID virus, the Commission proposed the recovery plan and a revised budget for the next 7-year period in order to address in particular the economic and social consequences of the COVID virus, but also to look into solidarity between member states and address energy poverty. So what the Commission will do now in the next month on energy poverty. So first of all, in line with the provisions of the Clean Energy Package, we are preparing currently as we speak guidance for member states on energy poverty. This guidance will take the form of a Commission recommendation, and it will be tabled at the same time as we will propose the renovation wave, so in the autumn when we come back from summer holidays. The guidance on energy poverty will look at different ways of measuring energy poverty. So it will assess energy poverty from different angles, from whether people can pay their bills, whether they can heat their houses in the proper way, whether they can cool their houses in the proper way, etc., etc. The guidance also intends to bring best practices from member states on how to address energy poverty and also looks into different financing tools that are available to address energy poverty, and here in particular the renovation wave that will be presented at the same time is of key importance related to the recovery package, of course. So the financing means are there. The regional funds are also very prominent and have already contributed to addressing energy poverty, poor housing, inefficient, energy efficient housing, etc. in many member states. These tools remain at the disposal for member states, but a lot need to be done by member states also in implementing the best measures that we have identified together with the member states in the upcoming guidance document. So I'm very happy today to have the opportunity to, first of all, to briefly introduce the session and introduce the topic, but even more happy to be able to then listen to your insights and your presentations on this important topic, because it is a topic which is still new in the sense of, not new in the sense of having identified it. It is a topic that member states have been addressing for quite some time, but it is new in the sense that we are now sharing experience between ourselves, between other stakeholders and participants, how best address energy poverty using the best knowledge, using the best information we have at our disposal. So therefore, I'm very positive and very convinced in that next year, when we resume, hopefully in a physical meeting, we can already then see that a lot of good progress has been made and the number of energy poor people has again steadily decreased and has a strong downward trend. So this from my side. I already in advance thank to you all for your participation here today and look forward to a very interesting debate. And now I hand over to Harriet for introducing the concepts in more detail and to share the recent findings from the observatory. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for that introduction. So good morning, everyone. It's really fantastic to have so many people joining us today. So my name is Harriet Thompson, and I've project managed the EU Energy Poverty for the past 3.5 years, along with Stefan Bazarowski. And during that time, we have seen massive shifts in the energy landscape that has resulted in a huge momentum today for hopefully finally resolving the issue of energy poverty. Next slide. But firstly, what do we mean by energy poverty? So for us, it's a multidimensional issue that occurs when households are not able to adequately heat or cool their homes and to provide other required energy services at an affordable cost. It's not just about income, but rather it's the combination of inequalities in energy and housing systems, as well as other factors such as increasing extreme weather conditions. Next slide. Next slide. So there's a large scientific base that shows energy poverty causes a range of adverse physical and mental health and well-being impacts, which all have associated wider economic costs from people not going to school, having sick days from work, and as well as the increased cost of healthcare. And at the same time, we know that if we address energy poverty in an equitable manner, in a holistic way, taking consideration of other policy issues, it can result in multiple policy wins, especially for mitigating climate change, improving our local air quality, for example. Next slide. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Energy Poverty Observatory, as Catalina mentioned, this is an initiative financed by the European Commission, and it mainly exists via this web platform, which contains the world's largest set of resources on energy poverty, from over 300 policies and measures, practical examples of how the issue has been addressed in different member states, a comprehensive indicator dashboard to more than 800 members from 60 countries worldwide. So it really has been a phenomenal effort in bringing together all of this high quality evidence targeted at a range of different stakeholders to try and help collectively to address the problem. We also hold specialist events such as today, but also annual conferences, and we publish annual monitoring reports. And I'd like to draw your attention to one that we published this week, which is our annual Pan-EU report. And you'll be able to find that both under our knowledge and resources section of this website, but also available via the European Commission's own website later today. So we would encourage you to go and browse this website at your leisure, engage with other members, see what's happening sort of worldwide, and to also look at our latest Pan-EU report. Next slide. So given the multi-dimensionality of energy poverty that was mentioned earlier, there are a variety of different indicators that are available to capture different elements of energy poverty. So within the Energy Poverty Observatory, we use 4 main indicators of energy poverty. And these look at issues around significant underspending, which might indicate a household has sort of dangerously low levels of energy service provision. We also look at excessively high energy expenditure, where that indicates putting a lot of pressure on domestic budgets, and they might have to make cutbacks to, say, food or to buy medicine, things like that. And we find that in combination, up to 82 million households across Europe are energy poor. And we find, for example, with high levels of arrears on utility bills and a self-reported inability to keep warm, this is particularly prevalent within Central and Eastern and Southern Europe. Whereas by comparison, excessively high and excessively low energy expenditure has a higher prevalence within Northwest Europe. So we do find this interesting pattern across the European Union with different types of households affected. So we know, for example, that tenants, renters tend to be quite an affected group, not only because the condition of rental housing tends to be poorer, but also because they don't have the resources or the power to be able to rectify those housing conditions. Next slide, please. So in addition to looking at the prevalence of energy poverty, we also, within our latest report, analysed the final version of national energy and climate plans. So this was in terms of the energy poverty provision according to the criteria that's listed in this summary table here. So as this table indicates, we do find that significant progress has already been made across most member states in Europe. And indeed, almost all member states do recognise the issue of energy poverty, which is a stark contrast to even sort of 3-4 years ago. Within this table, a higher score along the bottom indicates a higher level of sort of specific energy poverty provision. We find that only Sweden has assessed that the phenomenon of energy poverty should not be covered within the NECP, and so they did not provide an assessment of the situation, and hence they have a score of 0. But in other cases, we find, for example, within Belgium, that there's generally quite a lot of specific provisions targeted towards energy poor and vulnerable households. But we do find that overall, it's clear that much more remains to be done to tackle energy poverty via kind of concrete measures and policies, with significant gaps in terms of official policy definitions, having monitoring indicators, but most importantly, whether there exists financing that's dedicated towards energy poor and vulnerable households, and whether there are specific engagement mechanisms for example, bringing together different stakeholders and actually identifying energy poor households. Next slide, please. So within this report, we also mapped the emergency measures that were taken specifically in terms of energy in response to COVID-19 across the EU27 member states. So we know that COVID has forced millions of households to stay at home, sometimes with a decreased income, but also higher energy bills because there's naturally an increase in energy consumption. And we know that this has exacerbated the existing risk of energy poverty, but it's also causing new forms of energy vulnerabilities, perhaps in spaces that had previously been relatively unaffected. So our analysis found that there's a variety of different actors, governments, regulators, and utilities who have really scrambled to put in place a variety of different measures to keep energy affordable and available to all households. And this ranges from bans on disconnections, energy discounts, or in some cases, a quantity of free energy supply, to delayed payment schemes where a household might pay less over a prolonged period of time. So the measures presented here are not exhaustive, and it is a very fast-changing situation. And already some schemes have ended, and new ones are constantly kind of being added. But we do find a really interesting spatial divide here. So, for example, within Nordic countries, there's no specific attention given to emergency energy measures. And instead, the emphasis there has been on providing income support. So we haven't mapped non-energy forms of provision, because that would be quite a huge undertaking. But it's interesting to note the ways in which emergency energy measures have been rolled out at a very fast pace across Europe. And overall, it's clear that the pandemic and policy responses to it have created a radically different policy landscape for addressing energy poverty in the future, particularly in terms of guaranteed minimum levels of energy access and the flexibility of being able to make new payment arrangements. And I think this will be something moving forward that member states are going to have to navigate, and it will require kind of a rethinking of how we approach the issue. Next slide, please. So I want to just give a quick kind of run through of what the landscape looks like now. But to close, you can find further information about all of these analyses in our new Pan-EU report. And really all that remains is to hand over to our panel discussion, and I look forward to engaging in discussion later on. So thank you again.
Thank you, Harriet. Thank you for that exhaustive overview. So my name is Stefan Buzarowski. I am chair of the steering committee of the EU Energy Poverty Observatory, otherwise a professor of human geography at the University of Manchester and an associate of the Institute for European Energy and Climate Policy. So we are now continuing with our panel discussion. We have a wide array of panelists and from different backgrounds, as we previously mentioned. We are also going to try to make this session as interactive as possible. So there will be a Slido poll at the which should appear at the bottom of your screen, which should be launched anytime now. And this poll, several questions will be asked, which we encourage you to answer, so that we have a set of talking points as well. Indeed, the Slido poll is now appearing on your screen. So all you need to do is go into a web browser, type slido.com, and then it will ask you for a prompt, and the prompt is hashtag EUSEW2020. And indeed, some people are already joining and answering questions. We have, as we speak, 6 responses, 9. It's interesting to watch. But indeed, the top priority remains finding out what the EU is planning in this policy area. Indeed, as mentioned by Katharina before, and finding out more about the topic, which was what Harriet talked about. So we're glad that at least we are hitting the right notes on that front. So 35 people already responding, and we're getting a good sense of what the discussion is about. And indeed, our next lineup of speakers, there'll be 6 speakers in the session, will all address precisely these questions. And indeed, those speakers are number 3 on your list. So that is good. It's good to know that there isn't anyone who is just attending for no specific reason. Okay, well, once we hit about 60 or 70, we might just move back onto the speakers. And the session has 2 sections. And in the first section, basically, we are going to hear more from the energy attachés representing Ireland and Greece. And also the director of the Department of Energy Efficiency and Savings at the Czech Ministry for Industry and Trade. So maybe we can start with the energy attachés first. So I'm delighted to welcome to our session Mr. Colm O'Connell, who is the energy attaché for Ireland, and indeed he has been an energy attaché since last year, since summer 2019, having previously worked on electricity and gas regulation, market integration, market design, state aid for the energy sector, and Brexit, She also served as private secretary for Ireland's first Green Energy Minister. So, Colm, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Stefan, and good morning to everybody. Next slide, please, there. So, in this overview, I will look at the supports that are in place in the Irish government, the operation of some of the schemes that address energy poverty, and then we look forward to the next steps. Next slide. So, energy poverty in Ireland, it's calculated that 17% of households are considered to be in energy poverty. And as Harry previously said, this is closely aligned with overall poverty. So energy poverty is not a specific thing. It seems to be a subsection of general deprivation. And this is calculated as households who spend more than 10% of their monthly income on energy bills. Next slide. Policy tools we use to address it are codified in the government's strategy to combat energy poverty, which was published in 2016 and is currently under review. Energy efficiency is one of the key tools that we use to alleviate energy poverty, and this consists mainly of a variety of home energy grant schemes. Next slide. We have other measures such as general income support measures, such as fuel allowance and a household benefits package. Next slide. And other housing supports that are not necessarily energy specific, such as housing aids for older people and local authority or public housing improvements. Next slide. Other measures used to address energy poverty are more general consumer protection measures, such as detailing provisions for vulnerable customers in the Energy Consumer Supplier Handbook, using an energy engaged code with a detailed disconnections policy that is aimed to avoid disconnections, and also market approaches such as promotion of switching, using approved websites to avail of the best energy offers so that customers can reduce their exposures to high energy prices. Next slide. Our main tool or scheme to address energy poverty is the Warmer Home Scheme, which is a nationwide scheme that has been in place since 2001, administered by the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland on behalf of the Ministry. It delivers free energy upgrades to householders in receipt of certain social benefit supports. And to date, 140,000 homes have received work under the scheme since it began. Next slide. So up until 2 years ago, 2018, the interventions were mainly focused on shallow upgrades, but more recently, deeper upgrades have become available. And the annual budget for the scheme in 2020 is at a high of 52.8 million euros. And this has been funded using ring-fenced receipts from the carbon tax revenues. Next slide, please. Another scheme, which is a much smaller scheme, is called the Warmth and Wellbeing Scheme. And this is a holistic scheme administered by the local authority, the health authority, and the energy ministry with the help of the energy authority. It provides free home upgrades to people who are deemed to be in energy poverty and who are also living with chronic respiratory diseases. Next, please. Next slide. I think you skipped one there, I think. Back one, please. So some of the challenges that are apparent are the need to target the right homes, the appropriate homes, to encourage and engage participation in schemes, to reduce reliance on fossil fuels. So energy efficiency measures can bring us some of the way, but we still need to address the decarbonisation issue. And also, as Harry had also mentioned, the need to address energy poverty in rental properties. Next, please. So for vulnerable households, different approaches are required to general grant schemes. We need to ensure that interventions improve conditions, do not make things worse. And most essentially, we need to keep homeowners or householders at the forefront of the process, to give direct on-hand support with applications for grants, to communicate clearly and in simple terms, and to spend the correct amount of time on site visits to ensure the interventions are the best ones for that particular household. Use the language of the homeowner and also learn from the expertise in areas that are aligned with poverty and energy poverty, such as the Health Authority. Next, please. So the next steps in Ireland are outlined in the 2019 Climate Action Plan and also to a certain extent in our very soon to be published National Energy and Climate Plan. So the Irish Climate Action Plan has a commitment to upgrade over 5,000 homes in Ireland by 2030. And that will include the installation of at least 400,000 heat pumps in existing homes. And in order to ensure that the plan is fair, the Climate Action Plan has specific commitments relating to energy poverty. Next, please. So the plan is committed to improve how we target energy efficiency upgrade schemes to ensure that those most at risk are the ones that benefit. The plan also commits to address the split incentive and rental market in Ireland, and we've recently finished a consultation in that area and are currently analysing the results. And also we aim to address improvements to local authority housing, improving energy efficiency, increasing standards, and setting minimum standards at B2. Next, please. That's it. Okay, sorry, that is it. Thank you very much for listening. And I'll hand it back to the moderator.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been very good to get that overview. So next is the Greek energy attaché, Panagiotis Masaras, who has been working since this year in the permanent representation of Greece to the EU. Previous experience includes working in the Ministry of Environment and Energy, and he has degrees in economic sciences, philosophy, and MBA, as well as a degree from the Greek National School of Public Administration. Panagiotis, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Stefan. Good morning to everybody. But this is not my presentation, it's Mr. Sokor's, I think.
Yes,
that I see.
Correct. We need the presentation by Mr. Masaras.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me in this session and for giving me the opportunity to present the situation concerning energy poverty in Greece. I'm going to describe mainly the measures taken and our next steps in tackling the issue. Next slide, please. In Greece, there is not an official definition of energy poverty, but we are working on an indicator in order to quantify the phenomenon. It takes into account both the percentage of households which are unable to cover 80% of their minimum energy needs and the percentage of households in which actual energy expenses exceed 10% of their annual income. But sometimes this last indicator does not reflect clearly the real picture, so we consider complementing it with the percentage of households with net income less than 80% of the median household income. The indicator is elaborated by the Center for Renewable Energy Sources in the framework of the National Energy Poverty Observatory. Next slide, please. The energy poverty phenomenon has increased the last decade, mostly due to the impact of the economic recession. This conclusion can be derived from the indicator regarding the failure of households to achieve satisfactory levels of indoor heating or cooling comfort, which is determined by the Hellenic Statistical Authority as part of a sample income and living condition study. The indicator, as you can see, deteriorated the period 2011 to 2014. It amounted to 15% of that total population in 2010 and then reached 32.9% in 2014. The increased rate of energy poverty was stabilized during the period 2014 to 2016 and then started to decrease. Next slide, please. When it comes to a binding legal document, an energy poverty response action plan is envisaged on the basis of Law 4342, the Article 25. It will be ready within 2020. It goes without saying that there are provisions and measures established in our NECP. Now, which are these targets that we have? Next slide, please. The quantitative objective is to reduce by at least 50% the relevant energy poverty footprint by 2025, as well as to reduce it by 75% compared to 2016, and to bring it to levels well below the EU average by 2030. Next slide, please. The decrease in time of the percentage of energy poverty is due to specific measures that have been already implemented. Since 2011, energy efficiency improvement programs in buildings have been implemented, mainly the Saving at Home program. The two first cycles have mobilized approximately 650 million euros, and the new cycle is going to be launched this autumn with a total dedicated amount of 350 million euros. Since 2012, the state provides a heating allowance for heating oil to certain categories of consumers according to their income, health condition, and the size of their residence. Since 2013, the social household tariff, which involves discounts to the electricity consumed by beneficiaries, has been established. Next slide, please. I would also like to mention the establishment of our National Energy Poverty Observatory, the financial assistance for low-income households in order to replace the existing heating oil boilers with natural gas boilers, the fact that under the energy efficiency obligation schemes, participating energy companies can meet the energy saving target by implementing technical and behavioral measures in vulnerable households. Next slide, please. In 2017, 10 million euro special aid was granted to support low-income consumers who have been disconnected from the electricity grid due to overdue debts. There was an automatic transition to the universal service regime. And in 2018, Law 4513 concerning energy communities has been voted in Parliament, which can give the opportunity to local stakeholders generate energy and consume it, helping them with their energy bill. Next slide, please. Most of these measures are expected to continue to be implemented during the period until 2030, but additional ones are being considered in order to achieve our ambitious target mentioned. The conclusion of our Energy Poverty Response Action Plan is central towards this direction. It will comprise specific actions related to the improvement of energy efficiency in energy-poor households and other social policy or energy pricing measures. Specific policy measures will be identified in accordance with the requirements of both Directive 944 and 2002, and the specific process will be developed to monitor and measure the impact of each measure separately in order either to redesign existing or to adopt new policy measures. Improvement of the existing measures of the social tariff and provision for the automatic transition of vulnerable consumers into the universal service scheme is being considered. Next slide, please. There is a possible introduction of the energy card, which will replace other support measures for the consumption of energy goods, and which will enable consumers to choose the way in which they will have their energy needs met. Targeted financing programs will be designed to improve the energy efficiency of residential buildings vulnerable with regard to energy. Incentives will be explored for both energy suppliers under the Energy Efficiency Obligation Scheme and energy communities so that they can contribute more actively to the energy upgrade of buildings. Development of clean forms of energy, funded by projects implemented by energy communities with the participation of individuals, local authorities, legal persons aiming to promote RES and reduce energy poverty. And finally, special measures for regions in transition, coal regions in transition, will be implemented. They include the promotion of small-scale RES applications for the reduction of energy poverty. This axis also could include, among others, biomass or biogas projects with the participation of local livestock cooperatives, generally self-generation energy communities projects, with the possibility of utilizing the existing energy infrastructure, which means the transmission networks, and also the development of natural transmission and distribution networks in regions in coal transition in order to assure better air quality, energy security, and economic prosperity for local communities. Special attention will be given to residents in poor regions where district heating was provided by nearby lignite-fired plants that will be phased out until 2023, according to our NECP. So we have to find a solution for these poor regions. Next slide. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you again for giving us such a comprehensive overview of measures in Greece. So we're continuing with member state perspectives. Moving on to Czechia, we've got Vladimir Sokor, who is since 2015 director of the Department on Energy Efficiency and Savings at the Czech Ministry of Energy, Industry and Trade, with a degree from University of Economics in Prague, extensive experience working with Seven, a well-known company working on energy efficiency. So without further ado, Vladimir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Stefan. Good morning to everybody. It's a pleasure to present you some information from Czech Republic in relation to energy poverty. But I can say that, as Harriet already presented, the situation in Czech Republic is not such crucial like in other countries by energy poverty. But I would like to comment status and probably solutions. So next slide, please. Well, for Czech Republic, the definition of energy poverty is not in Czech legal system yet. And we try to find a good definition, but till this time it's not ready yet. And the definition of vulnerable customer is aimed mainly for disabled and disadvantaged people. And non-legislative solutions could be in relation to National Action Plan for Smart Grids. But, well, it's another story, and approximate. EU legislation, of course, is inspiration for us, that winter package, and but we see that energy poverty is not defined in European legislation. We try to find a better solution for national surroundings. Next slide, please. And we see three types of aspects of energy poverty. One is technical aspects in relation to buildings, and mainly technical quality and energy performance of the building, and also other things. And second is energy and social aspects of environment. It means outside conditions. And for example, energy prices and social benefit system, social services, and others. And last is characteristic of building users. It means households and households' incomes and consumer behavior, which is very important. And of course, it is in relation to information and number of household members and other things. So next slide, please. Next slide. Yes, thanks. Well, energy poverty and vulnerability from Czech experience reality, we can say that we have quite a high share of energy consumption cost in household costs. But according to presentation of Harriet, it was not also such crucial, but it is farming, and we have a small share of households indicating of inability to adequately heat their apartment. It is not high, but of course, it is also important information. And from the side of customer vulnerability as weakness, like threat of poverty, We have a high number of households which have problems with paying extraordinary expenses. It means approximately 300, 400 euros. It's quite some share. And what is critical, what would be critical element that energy areas, it means that what people has to pay to energy companies, it is a way to social exclusion. Next slide, please. We have two forms of solutions. Passive solution, it is influence of social transfers in relation to benefits, housing benefits, and other social instruments. And we can say also about social tariffs for energy supplying, but for us it is not acceptable way because it is different access to different customers. And from our vision, energy poverty is more social issue than energy issue. And active solutions could be by targeted advising, and we are preparing information campaign in relation to energy efficiency and other things which are in regarding to energy poverty also. And financing and other solutions are also acceptable. Subsidy, soft loan, but it has quite weak points. For example, when somebody can obtain investment subsidy, he needs more money for operation costs, and it is last slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. And final slide. Well, question is about definition. And during this last year and this year, we are in connection with University of Economics in Prague, and there is team who are preparing analysis for energy poverty and vulnerable customer. And by the end of this year, we will have some results from this. And besides that, we have a working group from another ministries, and we are prepare definitions and other issues, all including subsidy program, which can be for support of solutions in relation to energy poverty. And in the middle are three main issues: social, economic, and environment. And from our side, the social issues and social elements are the most important. And from our vision, we have quite low poverty rate, as I said already, and low proportion of households indicating energy problems. And but that what is quite important that we have higher vulnerability of households from the side of debt, foreclosures, and other things which are not in relation, just in relation to energy poverty. So it's all from my side, and thank you very much for attention. Hope that I kept the 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and once again, a very comprehensive, very useful presentation. Just a technical issue, do refresh the screen if it freezes or you get a sort of a, it's not proceeding, you just need to refresh on the platform. So it's very good to get, we're already getting some questions. Yeah, we had a question around will the slides be available after the event? Indeed, they will be. 48 hours ideally, maybe a bit longer. And we have a quick question for Harriet Thompson. I don't know, Harriet, what you want to give us a quick response, because before we go on to the next speaker, where does the 82.3 million people come from? We have a question around the second wave of COVID-19. Again, maybe if you want to respond to that quickly, we will also come back to these questions at the end of the session. So maybe some quick comments from Harriet.
So the upper limit there of 82.3 million is from the latest household budget survey data from 2015 that was released just a few months ago, and that shows the energy burdens. That's based on excessively high energy expenditure, so where a household is spending more than twice the median level on their energy bills within the household. So up until very recently, we were having to rely on data from 2010, so we now have a much clearer idea of the energy expenditure burdens. And then on the second question, I think from some of the early best practices we're seeing in relation to COVID-19 is to have universal coverage. So where you're not providing that support on the basis of having a certain level of income or having passport social welfare benefits entitlement. So definitely universality and making sure that it goes on for a really long time. So not just kind of a 3-month provision, but really looking, in some cases we've seen 2-year measures put in place. So that would be kind of my first reaction to that, but we do have a bit more of analysis contained within the new PAN-EU report as well.
Thank you, Harriet. And indeed, we will come back to these questions, particularly the issue around recovery actions to increase resilience at the end of the session. So I hope you found this material presented so far interesting. We brought in 3 different member states with very different experience, with very different parts of Europe, and indeed different range of measures, different challenges. But now we're going to start moving on to a more sort of critical overview provided by experts and people, practitioners, people who are really involved in a subject at a more pan-EU scale. So of these 3 speakers in the next part of the session, the first one is Dr. Vlasis Economou, who is Senior Researcher and Programs Director at the Institute for Energy and Climate Policy. He's an economist. And indeed coordinating a series of EU-funded projects on energy efficiency, energy poverty, including, for example, EUSEW2020 Social Watt, who covers energy poverty under the Article 7 of the Energy Efficiency Directive. So without further ado, Vlasis, the floor is yours.
Hello, so I just have 2 minutes. Thank you very much for the introduction. Indeed, so we're coordinating a series of Horizon 2020 projects on the Energy Efficiency Directive and also a lot on the Article 7 EED. Now, why I'm sticking to the Article 7 in relation to the energy poverty? You know, it's one of the core articles we have in the European legislation that sets quite a lot of targets for energy savings, and also within that, there is a clear mandate for energy poverty target groups. If we see, I mean, the update of the EED over the past years, the Article 7, for example, was replaced from the word may to the word shall. So there was a clear mentioning that in designing policy measures to fulfill the obligations to achieve energy savings, member states shall take into account the need to alleviate energy poverty. So we see that the legislation is already supporting it quite a lot in all this sense. Then, as you mentioned, I'll just 1 minute for the Social Watt. Indeed, the Social Watt is one of the projects where we're speaking with, where we're working with energy suppliers and energy utilities who have clientele on energy poverty and target groups on energy poverty, and they try to implement innovative schemes to alleviate energy poverty as a target group. So this is a business type of project, and it comes from the utilities and the energy suppliers, which is the core players that can help in the issue. And then the other project, the second one I'm finishing here, is about the NPOR. It's starting now, and it's again on energy poverty issues and policies on the private rented sector which is one of the sectors a bit forgotten in the whole discussion of the energy poverty now, and where we have the split incentives between the landlord and tenant problem, and of course lock-in effects where tenants are locked into the current residential situations and the energy efficiency investments meet legal or technical barriers. So these two projects I'll mainly represent, and of course the work we are doing for DG Energy for evaluating the Article 7 EED policies from the member states and on the NECPs. But we'll have time to discuss this in the next round. Thank you.
Thank you, Vlasis, for keeping to time and really giving us that very concise overview. So we are moving on. The next intervention will be by Maureen Cornelis, who is the director and founder of Next Energy Consumer, and it's a Turin-based policy consultancy focused on the social aspects of energy and climate transitions. I should add that Maureen is the co-author of the latest EU Energy Poverty Observatory report, which we will mention once again at the end and provide you further details on how to access. So, Maureen.
Thank you, Stefan. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, indeed, I'm a policy consultant. I focus mostly on the social aspects of the energy and climate transition, in particular energy poverty. There are several projects I'm involved with in different EU countries, in particular the EPOF, but also the research project ESRC Just Energy on access to justice and energy poverty. I'm really glad to mention this project because we are reaching the end of it, and we found out a lot of interesting aspects. For instance, on the fact that people, energy poor people, tend not to claim their rights. So we are seeing that it's very, very important to signpost them, to indicate a lot of, to train and form a lot of intermediaries for them to find their ways and to be really empowered and to make the most of all the rights that have been offered by the different EU directives and the different laws. What I should also mention is that I work at different levels in different countries and also in Mexico. So I have quite a good overview of the situation in different countries. I'm French, but I'm based in Italy. I used to live in Belgium, so I am quite a European nerd, if we can say it this way. Anyway, the thing is, regarding energy poverty overall, there is still a lot of discrepancies between countries, and people, depending on where they live, they will be affected differently, and that's really something we need to address, and we need to be critical about this. That if we want to have to really solve energy poverty, we have to be bold also at the political level.
Thank you. That's it. We won't be very brief, which is good. Will give us more more time for questions. But if not, we will continue to the next presenter, Monica Frassoni, who is an Italian politician, environmental campaigner, and a member of the European Parliament for 10 years, co-president of the Green Group in the Parliament between 2002 and 2009. She has also been a co-chair of the European Green Party, and since 2010, president of the European Alliance to Save Energy. And indeed, in 2016, included by Euractiv as one of the top 40 policy experts with influence on energy policy, energy efficiency policy. So thank you, and the floor is yours.
So good morning, buongiorno. Thank you very much for this invitation and this occasion to have this conversation among us. So the European Alliance to Save Energy has been working on the issues of energy policy, energy poverty, because as both Marine and Vladimir said, this is an issue that is very much linked to the energy transition in general. Normally, when you are energy poor, you are also disadvantaged and you need to have social support. And therefore, this issue of energy poverty is, according to us, something that is very much linked to the way in which the Green Deal will be implemented and to the way in which energy efficiency will play a role, notably in the quality of housing and in the capacity of implementing the existing legislation, and above all, I would say, the amazing amount of funds that hopefully will flow to different member states, to most member states, because of the COVID-19. So my first message is simply to say that it is very difficult to detach the question of energy poverty from the quality of the programming and from the quality of the energy transition measures that we will have to see, because, and we will develop this later in the conversation, the issue, for example, of renovation wave, of recovery fund, of the just transition, have all links to this question of energy poverty. I would like also to add that I was myself surprised of the numbers that Harriet gave, because it was linked to the usual one, which is about 54%, 54 million people. And also that I personally came across with this question of energy poverty when a couple of years ago there was a very big cold wave here in Belgium, and I found out that in a developed country like the one I'm living, about 10% of the people lived in an unhealthy or not very good, well isolated houses. And I think that this question of awareness is something that changed really over the last years, and certainly thanks to projects like the one that Harriet and Stefan are leading. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. So the session has really picked up a pace now in the last 3 interventions, and we're getting so many questions. And well, we have about half an hour now, really for the discussion to continue through a more interactive format, and lots of questions arising. I will start with some of the questions we're getting on Slido. And the questions with the most likes, I should say, is for Colm. Could you elaborate a bit more about the measures to tackle split incentives and target the private rental sector?
Thank you very much for asking the hardest question. So at the moment, we haven't introduced specific measures. This was one. And just to elaborate on the presentation, the Energy Ministry has established a special advisory group with representatives from the Energy Ministry, Department of Housing, and the Energy Authority. And this group has been tasked with considering and making recommendations to government on the appropriate policy interventions, taking account of existing research and relevant international best practice, stakeholder inputs, and the impact on the current supply of rental accommodation and people living in energy poverty. The Climate Action Plan also commits to address this issue, but as of today, we have not proposed any specific recommendations or measures. I would anticipate that those will be forthcoming in the next 6 months. So sorry for not being more precise, but it's a policy measure in process rather than completed to any extent.
Cool. So there's another question for you about revenues of carbon taxes. They are, I don't know if you can see it on the screen, that are dedicated to housing renovation of the energy poor. Is that something that you might advise elsewhere, what the experience is from Ireland? Maybe some of the other energy attachés could also comment on this as well.
Okay, I might go first, and very briefly. Certainly, we would not advise against it. It is one method of ensuring that the appropriate level of finance is procured from the Ministry of Finance, which is never an easy thing. And to date, it has been effective to target the carbon tax and to use it to address general energy efficiency and more specifically energy poverty areas. We think it is appropriate.
wonder if we have any more perspectives on this from maybe Greek and Czech Republic. I believe you're muted. Don't think we're getting anybody else. Vladimir, I think you're muted. Can you speak now? Yes, yes.
Yeah, excuse me. Well, I can say that from our side, are in relation to energy poverty, of course, but it is not so important and not so crucial for inhabitants. It's more problematic for entrepreneurs, I think, but of course it could be also for some groups of inhabitants. And the question is that it's necessary how to solve it.
Well, if I may.
Yes, please. Yes.
There's not such a measure in Greece, but as you know, we are in the process of elaborating our action plan, and there will be afterwards a public consultation. So we could take this into account and see what we can do.
Stefan, maybe I add here something. So in the, as I said, in the NPOR project, exactly we're tackling with this issue of the split incentive. And we've already identified some best practices like from the energy efficiency lease contracts or energy efficiency mortgages. And what we do is that we have 7 countries on board, including Greece, the Netherlands, Italy, Germany, Estonia, Croatia, and Austria. And we try to implement specific policies to tackle this issue. For Greece, the one that will be, just as Mr. Massaro was here, so for Greece, as I see now, the policy that will be implemented, of course, and we'll try to customize it for the next period is energy efficiency obligation schemes, where there will be a specific focus for the next period in 2021-2030 on the split incentive part. And likewise, we have the same thing for more countries. So good practices do exist, mainly from the UK, I would say, and from there, we try to come up with some meaningful lessons for the other EU countries.
Thank you, Vlasis, for that. And indeed, NPOR is starting in a few months, and we will hear much more from that project in the period to come. We had also a few additional questions that we've already started before the session, and some of these do connect to what is being asked. One question that we asked all the presenters to reflect on is whether approaches towards energy poverty were affected by the COVID-19 crisis. They clearly have, but one issue that we are not entirely sure about is how and whether these changes will be permanent. And indeed, the question around building resilience around that globally I think is an interesting one, especially as we are expecting a second wave. So I would welcome some comments from all the panelists on this question. By the way, last time I checked, we had more than 200 people following this session, and they are from across the world. So indeed, these kind of discussions do have an impact, and I'm really delighted that we can have this space, even virtually, to be able to reflect on these questions and indeed influence decisions and policy. So the panel is open for discussion. If anyone wants to take the floor to reflect on COVID-19 and the permanence of measures in building resilience.
If I can say quickly something, I believe that this issue will be best tackled, the question of relation between energy poverty and COVID, if we will be able, both in the REACT-EU and in the renovation wave, to basically earmark a massive action on social housing. I think that this will be really key. The question of earmarking is not easy, actually, in the current discussion, not even for building in general. As we know, there was some earmarking foreseen, but it was taken out with before the last proposal of the Commission around the renovation, around the recovery fund and REACT-EU and all the other instruments. But I really believe that the connection between everybody having to stay at home and therefore having a much higher awareness of the need of improving the quality of our houses and the capacity of the renovation wave to actually implement current legislation, notably the APD, find the right financial support, which actually goes down to the local level, together with some special instruments that will be taken because of this extraordinary situation, are the best guarantee that this thing works. And the biggest risk is, of course, the fact that they remain not used enough. And therefore, the question of training, the question of visibility of these instruments, and the capacity of these to be aggregated, notably to be used in social housing stock is key. And therefore, there are big hopes, but it's not going to be very easy.
Just a small comment.
Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
In Greece, also, the renovation wave is very much expected. Energy efficiency will be a priority, and this is reflected also in our NECP. And not only in terms of energy poverty, but also in terms of creating growth and jobs. Traditionally, the construction sector is a sector in Greece that creates revenue. So it is a means in order to tackle the crisis that emerges from the sanitary crisis. We have a schedule. We are expected that by 2030, 15% of the total number of residents in the country, that is 60,000 homes per year, will be upgraded in terms of energy efficiency. And we are going to complement this with the initiative of the Commission concerning the renovation wave and see how this goes.
I think a very interesting aspect of the COVID is how we realized that housing is part of us. Our home became our shelter, but it also became our schools, our office. And so it became really more than just a bed and a kitchen. And that there are so many links with the health and housing. And it's no longer possible really to separate those topics and to see them in silos. So I think one of the positive things that will be brought through the policy response to the COVID will be that we need more integrated answer and more integrated and pansectoral outlook over the housing and energy poverty issue overall, and whatever the country.
Can I play a bit of a provocative role here? I think just to stir up a bit more discussion is that, okay, if we see the numbers actually in the IEA reports, the International Energy Agency reports on the COVID part. So we had that during the COVID period, we had an increase in the residential electricity demand by 40%. And if we take countries, even the 20, 30 days of the lockdown, like Italy, we had like 27% of electricity demand increase. So that means that we really come up to some serious issues now, that the reduction of GDP also and the reduction of the income of the households, of course, has increased the energy poverty problem. Now, a bit of the provocative is that we need to know that also during the COVID, we had the low oil prices. And I'm pretty sure that in all the countries that do have ambitious plans, also in their NECPs, we have a lot of households that filled in their tanks for oil heating. And that has really aggravated the problem because this oil will burn at some point. We saw it in many countries happening. And therefore, if we assume that the NECPs now have been designed also as an extra point, if they assume that the NECPs were written down in some, let's say a couple of years ago, starting with the scenarios, with a modeling assumption of 2% growth in average in the entire EU, with all the COVID that happened now and the recession, the global recession that's happening, maybe it's good time to start thinking it more openly that NECPs should be revisited. I'm pretty sure that a lot of the energy plans that we do have in mind might completely fall out, given that we do have a complete different trend already happening there, okay, and the consumption pattern is changing. That's a suggestion just to provoke a bit discussion here.
Indeed. Sorry.
May I have again a short comment? May? Okay, thanks.
Yes, yeah.
From my point of view, that COVID area, so that COVID time, it was for inspiration for future, because according to my opinion, it's necessary to consider about change of behavior and change of priorities. And from our side, well, here is quite a lot of talks about investment for energy efficiency and other green issues. And what is very important, mainly year by year, I feel it more and more. One side is very good information about anything, and also about how to manage it, not only invest, but how to manage consumption of energy. And second is very good help for preparation of the project. And I feel it in Czech Republic very strongly, and we try to search good solutions, and it's not easy because the subsidy scheme is very strong.
If I may intervene briefly, Stefan?
Sure.
I suppose I concur with most of the comments already made, and certainly in the Irish context, the renovation wave and investments out of that will be crucial to ensure a far more improved housing stock with a lower carbon footprint and better well-being for householders. And again, to echo Marine's comments, this is something Ireland has discovered in the warmth and well-being scheme, that there's a direct link between the quality of the housing stock and the health of the individuals living in those houses, and that a more integrated approach will be crucial for the future.
If I may say something, Stefan? Thank you. I just wanted to say that to go back to what Vlasios said, I'm hoping that I'm pronouncing rightly his name. I believe that it is not only the instruments that he was talking about that have to be reviewed, but I think that one instrument that must absolutely be taken up is the long-term renovation strategies, of which only 7 member states have presented within the deadline of March, because there it is really possible to not only implement the current legislation of EPD, but to make all sorts of relevant actions related to energy poverty and in general to the renovation of buildings. I just want to remind that for the moment that we are in an average of 1% of renovation rate every year. In my country, Italy, I was extremely surprised to see that it is 0.4%. So it is really very, very low. We are talking about an average of 1%, but in reality, in very many member states, we are even going lower. And I think that this is an instrument for member states to actually put more energy in order to not only to answer the question of energy poverty linked to COVID, but also in general to prepare the renovation wave, because there is nothing really to wait. If we have an instrument, we will have more, and the point is actually how to make sure that the financial resources that will be done and the legislation that will come, above all, if the target will be raised, emission target will be raised from 40 to 55%. Do not catch the member state by surprise. So I think that this issue of the long-term renovation strategies is a very useful instrument to be used. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a very helpful set of interventions, and indeed gives us a good sense of where we are with regard to COVID-19 and some of the challenges that are arising. Indeed, and another question we asked, and it was following through in the discussion quite a lot, is the issue of local action, and this is something that will be a key challenge in the period to come, and in the question, in the context of NECPs as well. I mean, one thing I should say, Vlasi's comment on oil, it's not quite the same in all member states, and heating oil is not necessarily the main fuel for many households across the EU. It's other fuels. So indeed, what I think that shows is, and all these measures show, is that we have really quite a lot of diversity at the national and local scale. So one question I would like the participants to think about, and hopefully this addresses some of what was being asked on Slido, is what can be done at the local level, and how can NECPs facilitate that, respond to this new reality. Again, brief comments, please, because we only have 10 minutes and there's a few more points I'd like to make, and some of them are points of information. The panel is open for comments.
One of the first things to consider when we look at the local level is really the role of social actors, whether they be churches or schools or different kind of social actors, or because they are the ones who know and can identify the people affected by several forms of energy poverty. So when I analyzed the NECPs, I was really surprised to see that they were not mentioned by anybody, although they play this important role of linking this vulnerable population with some policy measures or some incentives that could really make a difference. Also with the renovation strategy. For instance, I have in mind the Réseau Ecohabitat in the north of France, which works between Caritas and a renovation institution. So it's really a question of building these links and linking up and building bridges between the different kind of expertise that can make a difference, a true difference in the life of energy poor people.
Any further comments? There was also a question about the Irish NECP. I don't think it's the only one that wasn't submitted. When we were doing the analysis, I think there was one more that we didn't have, but I don't know if there's Colm, you want to say something?
Sure. The NECP, we will set out objectives to address energy poverty, and also to identify the policy measures that we will implement. In there, I don't have any more specific details for now, but it certainly will be part of the final NECP. On local communities, I think I can agree very, very strongly with Marion. The experience in Ireland is that to best develop local energy initiatives in addressing energy poverty and other energy policy issues, it is fundamentally important to engage local communities, be they charities, be they voluntary bodies, and be they local housing associations, that help engage the citizens and help educate the citizens in a very direct way, but also to deliver efficiencies when communities can affect energy efficiency measures road by road or village by village, rather than at an individual level.
If I may follow up on what Colm said, I think that one of the issues that we find is that the lack of a direct link between, let's say, the European level and the local level, because they have to go through different layers, is a real issue. Just to make an example, the mayor of my city, which is called Brescia in northern Italy, he just told me, you know what, it's useless for me to go for these energy funds to the EU because it is too complicated. I have to convince the president of the region, then I have to do this, and I have to do that. And so I think that there must be a little bit of a thought given also in the new fund that will come up for a direct access, notably for this question concerning social issues, from cities, so from local communities to the EU directly. I think that this is a long way to go, I'm sure, but it is something that would be extremely, extremely useful. I know that a lot of member states don't like this at all, but I believe that this would be a very an effective way to deal with at least some parts of these programs and funds.
Thank you. Because there have been a few questions, and the question of social actors was mentioned indeed. by marine. And one other challenge is private actors as well as cooperatives. So getting more stakeholders involved in the fight against energy poverty. So we've talked about engaging multiple governance levels, different best practices. What about these other actors? What about cooperatives? What about private sector and social actors indeed? Any quick comments on that? Please be brief. You want
maybe from the social, if you're maybe from the social water, they can come up where we have the utilities on board, and if we consider the utilities as a private actors that do play the most important roles, yes, where we have the rule is simple, where we have obligation schemes, energy efficiency obligation schemes under the Article 7 ED with a concrete bonus factor for the savings, meaning that they can, if they implement savings to an energy poverty target group, they get some extra savings as a bonus factor. Yes, there are things have worked. If we don't have this, then they don't have, then it's completely out of the question. Things are pretty clear that they need a stimulus, even the private sector, to work on this difficult market segment. And also what we see that another point that the suppliers, that the utilities did have on the Article 7 when speaking about energy poverty is about the renewable energy systems. You know that one of the easiest solutions was rooftop PVs and all this stuff for the energy poor households. But these are not allowed under the Article 7 ED. So there comes a big issue we had already in the beginning of the project when having all these big suppliers on board. And they said, okay, why don't we go for RES, that is the best solution for our customers? And of course, we said, no, you cannot do it because Article 7 does not allow it per se, although there are, of course, provisions on that. But it's one of the issues that member states do face. And we see that in the current NECPs for the 2021-2030, under the Article 7, we had only 30 measures for poverty out of 300 measures in total. And of them, a small amount, a very small amount, maybe it would be like 10 to 11, they refer to renewable energy supply, and this has to do also with the role of supply of energy suppliers there. So this is something to be seen, whether this can be eligible and how it can be eligible and how member states can overcome this part for bringing the suppliers on board.
Thank you, Vlasis. Because we have only a few minutes left, I just want to, there's a question I want to ask Harriet, which was around the indicator. And indeed, you answered two of the questions that were on Slido. Before asking Harriet, I just want to highlight, given how little time we have, the two things. First of all, that the EU Energy Poverty Observatory Pan-EU report is now available on our portal. It will be also available on the EU Publications portal later on the day. If you just go to www.energypoverty.eu, and then if you go under news and events, you can find out more about tomorrow's event, which is around the annual conference of the EU Energy Poverty Observatory. Just click there. And if you go under knowledge and resources and then publications, not publications, sorry, member observatory documents, then you can find our latest report as well under EU annual reports. Harriet, very quickly, why do we have 4 indicators instead of 1?
So a really good question, and it is one that we've battled over for many years in different spaces, not just kind of in relation to this project, but for us, fundamentally, it's about the complexity and multidimensionality of energy poverty, that there is no one perfect indicator that exists that's able to capture that diversity. So this kind of basket of measures is an approach that a number of member states take, including, for example, France, and it's really the only way in which you can capture lots of different groups, those different profiles of energy poverty. So to give a kind of concrete example, you might have a single parent living in a very small flat where maybe their energy consumption isn't high compared to a different household with a larger property, but it still represents for their individual budget quite a disproportionate burden. At the other end of the spectrum, you might have somebody who lives in a really big property by themselves. They're under-occupying. There's just that one person, maybe their family members have grown up and moved out. So you've got to capture these very different realities of energy poverty. So that's why we advocate multiple indicators instead of just one.
Thank you, Harriet. That's the best answer I've ever heard yet in such a short space of time to a very complex question. Right, we're exactly on time. It's near 9:30. Can I just thank the audience for following. There was a shortcut in the, I believe, in the stream. So please just go to the EUSEW website. Soon web streaming will be available later on. And thank you to our amazing panelists for following to time, for being so responsive, for basically being here throughout the session. Thank you also to the European Commission and especially Teresa Aristegi for being in the background, for facilitating these questions. And see you at the rest of EUSEW and hopefully also at our conference tomorrow. Goodbye. Thank you.
Bye.